If we don't fight hard enough for things we stand for, at some point we have to recognize that we don't really stand for them. Paul Wellstone.
I'm very into somatic experiencing, which is talking a lot about our physical connections. And when we are actually together in real life, our bodies actually mirror and co-regulate in a way that they don't when we're together online. So much of what happened in Minnesota was about being in shared space with people. People have been forced into space together in a way that they never were. It's not very common for an Ecuadorian single mother to sit with a political lobbyist in the car every morning for 3 months and talk about whatever as that person drives them to work. But that happened. And people's lives are actually changed because people were forced into space together.
Her name in Ojibwe is Asiniiwiikwe, which means woman made of stone, which turns out to be an apt description of Ashley Fairbanks. And though her skills and experiences are varied, running from art and design work, to writing, to political campaigns, to climate work, to community activism, and beyond, her work is rooted in community, in helping others. And recently, with her founding of Stand with Minnesota, a community-driven, web-based platform designed to help support immigrants and refugees, particularly with aid in response to ICE's Operation Metro Surge. This woman made of stone has helped those in need to the tune of $20 million and counting. I'm Christopher Wurst, and this is
Soft
Power.
Powerful.
Soft
Power.
Powerful stories.
Powerful.
Soft
Powerful stories.
I was born and raised on the south side of Minneapolis, mostly on the West Bank, which is historically kind of an artist, bohemian, anarchist area with lots of immigrants. And then I moved around a lot as well. So after my kind of formative years, my parents got divorced, very typical, and we spent a lot of time with a single mom moving around all different parts of Minneapolis and kind of around the Twin Cities. Growing up in an incredibly diverse community, I think, was one of the most impactful parts of my life. Having friends who looked like all kinds of things and came from all kinds of places, I think just made me more open-minded about what life could be like, what family was like, and that people's cultures being different than mine felt like the norm. And I think that's really important since so many Americans really grow up in monoculture. I never really experienced that. And then also class-wise, I was around people from wildly different classes. I went to a pretty fancy private school for a while, but lived in public housing. So I had just really these experiences that were really full of contrast and never made me feel like there was one normal. I was around a lot of money and power as a child that I think most kids who are coming out of poverty don't ever experience. So I had friends whose parents were very, very wealthy and powerful people, and I got to experience and see their humanity as part of growing up. And I think that gives me a different relationship with power than a lot of people who have the same background as me, socioeconomically. So I've never been afraid of rich people or feel very different than rich people. That allows me, especially working in politics, to be around people who are kind of seen as these people that we have to kiss up to or try to, please in a way that I think is much more of a level playing field than had I not been raised in the same kinds of environments. I grew up with their nannies going to sit in the box seats at the sports games and whatever, and then going home to a trailer park or public housing or a shitty apartment somewhere. So it was just, like I said, full of a lot of contrast.
How did that make you feel, going back to public housing?
I don't know. I always had my mom just has always really been able to make the best of everything. So I never felt like we were missing a lot or that things were very different for me. But like I had a radical class analysis from the time I was like 7 years old, you know? I was like, oh, this is kind of screwed up that some people have such wildly different lives. Like that I have friends who have elevators in their houses and, you know, my mom is struggling to like buy food. That was an important lesson growing up, was that like not everyone is like us in really unfair ways too, right? So I didn't just see the folks struggling. I saw people who had never even thought about struggle. And that is so important to me now, especially as I'm at tables, like policymaking tables with people. And I can see when people have never experienced struggle so easily because they talk about things like, I tweeted this thing a long time ago that I think about frequently that is like, that sounds like so narcissistic to say I think about my own tweet frequently, but like, just the way that I said this, like that there's a difference between people who survival is like a language we speak and people whose survival is a metaphor. Like that they've never actually had to experience any kind of struggle to survive. And that I think shows up in all kinds of ways in our lives and how we have empathy. And yeah.
I'm curious about, well, kind of sticking to the theme that you were just talking about. Since you were kind of getting this viewpoint as a youngster, were you also seeing a path open up in front of you so that you thought that you had a kind of pathway forward?
It's something I've talked about in therapy a lot because I felt a lot of pressure from a very young age because I was like selected to get scholarships and stuff and go to private school as kind of like a tokenized Native person, that I was told from a very young age that like the well-being of my people depended on me. That like I was going to be the person who could provide solutions and like help people make ends meet and make change for my community. From the time that like literally I was like a, you know, second or third grader, I was told like that like my behavior in the classroom impacted my classmates a lot because I was a leader, and like just a lot of pressure that gets put on like gifted and talented kids, you know, that the way that we used to talk about children was multiplied being like a tokenized Native gifted and talented kid.
And did you see that in retrospect or did you see it at the time?
I think I felt very lucky when I was a kid. Like I felt like, oh, I'm so smart and that might make my life a little hard. Like I did know in the moment that like I was, you know, I never was like the super popular kid. I knew that things were going to be different and harder, but I felt lucky that that I was smart, that I was a chosen kid. And then I think I didn't really realize how the pressure of it impacted me until I had been kind of on like this gifted and talented track my entire life until I got to high school, and I was in a program where you took the ACTs like every year to track your progress. I had been like recruited by different fancy colleges, and then my house got foreclosed on my senior year of high school, and my mom moved away, and I moved in with my high school boyfriend, and I didn't know how to apply for colleges, and I didn't have anyone I could really ask about it, and felt too embarrassed. Like I couldn't afford college application fees or anything like that. And so I just ended up not applying to any colleges. I just became a blackjack dealer for like 3 years. And then, you know, I got laid off and during the recession and finally went back to college. And there it was when I was like kind of reconciling with like, what was it like to be told that I was on this like special track and then have it all taken away? And how had that like impacted how I saw myself and how I saw my role in the world? I feel really lucky actually that happened, because I think that I could have been on the path that a lot of tokenized people of color get put on, where like you get like a white savior complex for your own community, where like, you know, you get tracked into like Ivy League schools and maybe go into like law or politics and become very distanced from your own community. And my experience, like actually having to survive in poverty as an adult, kind of further solidified my own thoughts about what my community needed and who had the solutions, seeing more that like, oh, our community actually is full of experts. We're not people who need to be saved. We're people who need resources, but we're not people who need different solutions to come from outside of our community.
You know, I often said, because I was a diplomat for 21 years, that I learned as much bartending my way through college that affected me in a positive way as a diplomat as I did in college. Did you, as a blackjack dealer in 3 years, learn a lot of life skills that have served you well when you're meeting these fancy political panels?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I wasn't just a blackjack dealer too, right? It was a hustle. And so I like also worked like, shitty retail jobs and restaurant jobs and all the different kinds of things. I was like in my early 20s during the recession when none of my friends had a job and we were all just kind of like living like 8 to a house, trying to survive, eating like rice and beans. And so I learned so much in those years. You can be working as hard as you possibly can and still not make it. And that was such an important lesson that like I should have seen growing up. But like, when you're a little kid, the world around you is like the water, right? Like you don't know that there's water around you. But then seeing it as an adult and instead of having seen my mom being the one working, but experiencing like, what is it like to work 3 jobs and not ever have time to rest and then still be stressed out about your bills, or have your car break down and have there be no solution. Like those were things I feel like had I not learned them, I would be such a different person now. Like so much of the hostility you see like middle class and upper class people have, like a mistrust of the poor, I think was prevented from kind of growing in me because I had to live it. I was like the only Native kid at my school frequently. And so, we had like cultural fairs where everyone would bring like things from we had a lot of international students. You'd bring things from like your different countries and different cultures. And I would bring my jingle dress and my dad would make fry bread, and things are kind of treasured in that way. And I also was really lucky to grow up in a huge Ojibwe family. So my dad's like one of 7 kids who all kind of like work in the Native community in the Twin Cities. We had a lot of culture in our lives, not like traditional Anishinaabe culture, but kind of the contemporary urban Native culture was very much part of who I was growing up. Like I went to like the Native enrichment programs after school, and it's such a unique experience for like Native kids who grew up in Minneapolis. Most urban Native folks are kind of like very intentionally separated from their culture. But since Minneapolis has like the history that we do, we have a lot of programs that are celebrating our culture and even physical neighborhood. Like most urban Native communities don't have like a physical neighborhood that's very strong, that's attached to them. And Minneapolis has that, and I got to like both grow up and then work in that community as an adult as well, right? So I didn't really feel like any kind of pressure to assimilate, but I think that the pressure to perform culture was much more present for me. And especially as an adult, like working in museum environments or working in politics, it's often been like, okay, now go ahead and speak for your entire community. And having to learn to resist that and be like, actually, I'm not a representative of my community. I'm just me. But then still trying to be, an advocate for my community. It has been like a hard balance to learn throughout life. So Minnesota, is settled mostly by Scandinavians and Germans, but Scandinavians brought something really interesting to Minnesota culture, and I'm half Norwegian too, so I feel connected to this part of the story of bringing like Scandinavian populist idealism to Minnesota after like the violence of colonization and things like that. I mean, not that ever really ended, but after the main wave of white people moving to Minnesota, Scandinavians really shaped a city in Minneapolis where giving back was like an expected part of the culture, where governance like by the people was really celebrated in a different kind of way. So like very wealthy folks in Minnesota established foundations very early to like set this level of charity that was expected from the wealthy. Not to say that like people didn't amass huge unfair amounts of wealth, right, and from extracting and pillaging our state and the country, but like there was a matching side of that of charity, and then also of politics that were much more far to the left than most parts of the United States. The ideas of like community responsibility for people who have fallen through the cracks, like a social safety net, that was an idea in Minnesota much earlier than in most places. How is Minnesota having such a different response to ICE infiltration than other places? Not that we're like a magical place, right? But that we do have this powerful history of organizing that started way back when, started even right in indigenous times. We've had a different kind of culture than in other places. The American Indian movement and like Black Power movements working together to like self-police and build our own community safety systems. That all leads to people like me, like I'm almost 40, being raised in a city full of elder activists who could actually teach us things. Like, I feel most lucky that I got to grow up with activists in my life who are just like available, and we could ask them like, oh, how did you guys survive this time during the Reagan administration or like during the AIDS era? That's who raised us.
I'm curious about, this is something that I'm really interested in, and it's the intersection between the arts and civil society. And I'm curious about your evolution, sort of using arts to create social change and political change.
Like I said, I grew up in a very art-centric community. I always say I was kind of like baptized in paper mache on the West Bank. My mom used to help, organize Cedar Fest, which was like a part, kind of like May Day-esque sort of celebration on the West Bank. Also, like I said, it's like the water around you where you don't realize that other places may not have massive celebrations that the community comes together to put on. Like the magic of May Day is something that I've been trying to connect to like our organizing now too, of like we come together and we make this thing from nothing. We make this thing from like ideas and trash and like turn it into this beautiful celebration. I was really grounded in the arts as a kid, and then also just have like incredibly creative parents. And really, my parents just fostered my own artistic practice from a very young age. I got really into competing in county fairs when I was little. So I'd always enter like the youth art competition and like have always loved the state fair and like trying to get into like the art competitions there as well. I got to go to a middle school called Crosswinds, which was a 10 district school that was equally focused on the arts and sciences. So my art was really kind of cherished there as well. And then I went to a really weird school, a high school called Avalon, which still exists, that has no classes. And it was entirely project-based. So we got credit for doing things out in the community. I did theater classes at Children's Theater, which is an incredibly fantastic children's theater program that we have in Minneapolis. And then I also got to work at the Walker Art Center on the Teen Arts Council, which is probably one of the most important experiences of my entire life. I have so much gratitude to Whit Siasoko, who's an amazing artist in his own right, who really led that program when I was in it, where we got to work with artists in residence as high schoolers at the Walker and plan events for teenagers and like run the art program basically for teenagers with a lot of independence. So we just got to see like these artists who were doing some of the most innovative things in their field come through town and design projects with them. We worked with these really fantastic artists named Alora and Casadilla and built 10,000 1-watt radios to talk about like decentralizing power from Clear Channel. This is back in like 2005. So we were talking a lot about Clear Channel back then.
That's fascinating to me. And this show is actually on a community radio network that goes throughout the United States. Maybe just describe how that project came about, and then what were the outcomes from that project?
So Alora and Casadilla are this duo of artists from Puerto Rico who do a lot of installation-based work. They cast Christopher Columbus in chalk as like these tiny little chalk sculptures, and they passed them out to history teachers in Puerto Rico. So as they taught like the real history of the island, that they'd be degrading these sculptures of Columbus. And I just think as a teenager, I was like, oh my God, this is the coolest. I still think it's so cool, but that project in particular is really powerful. And so we got to learn about their work and then actually like meet with them and propose our ideas. And like I said, a lot of us were very focused on how Clear Channel owned so much of the airwaves in the Twin Cities. So Clear Channel, for non-Americans, it's like mega corp basically that owns like billboards and radio stations and all kinds of different networks. And we're like, this is frightening, right? To have one network consolidate so much power. And right, we've only just seen that trend continue now. But we were back then already pretty worried about it. So we talked a lot about like pirate radio and like what does it look like if radio waves were democratically run, basically. And so that led to us doing some research about like what are the legal legal limits on the size of radio you can build because it's very heavily regulated by the FCC. So we ended up building all of these little like micro radios and workshops with teenagers, and people like attach them to skateboards and attach them to, construction helmets. And I put one in a jewelry box. And then we did an event where you could drive down University Avenue and listen to broadcasts from all of these different little radio stations. So you could have your own like political show, or you could play music or whatever in this like massive kind of like unregulated pirate radio moment. So, yeah.
I love that.
Throughout my career, I've always said that I have like an equal part of like political, like activism work, of art kind of work, and then of like storytelling work. My artistic practice has always been like very kind of much more on the contemporary art side of like, how do we get people to ask questions about the world around them? Like I did a series when we were talking a lot about changing the name of Lake Calhoun to Budemakoska, where I was just doing street art that said this place already had a name, getting people to reflect on the idea of everywhere we are already had a name before we were there. Like these were all Indigenous places and they all had names. That's like, work I did 10 years ago that has a very linear path. I wrote a children's book 2 years ago now called This Land, about how all land is Indigenous land. And to me, it's just part of that same kind of art asking questions where people don't even really understand that they're experiencing art. I have a pretty broad definition of what art is.
I want to switch gears. I really want to go into some depth about your own activism and some of the projects that you've done, because I think that they've had a huge impact. And particularly, I wanted to talk about Stand With Minnesota, but maybe you can talk about the evolution of how you came to realize this kind of a project, and then talk about the project itself.
In my work, right, it's my day job. I do like communications work for political movements. I work for a climate organization, and I've done like political comms now since I was like 16 years old. I really try to learn in movement spaces what my role can be with the talent, like the skills that I have. Part of when I was looking at all of my friends out in the streets in Minneapolis, starting with things that happening in December, basically seeing so many of my friends out doing commuting work, like actually watching ICE as they moved around the Twin Cities, hearing from my dad every day about ICE staging in the parking lot at his work. And I was stuck in Texas. I live in San Antonio, Texas. And I was like, how do I contribute to this? And one thing I do is I create messaging. I talk to people on social media. I have a decent following on Blue Sky. So I was sharing on Blue Sky, like, here's all these different mutual aid projects that you can give to, because I'm just lucky to know a lot of activists and be very plugged into what was happening on the ground. So I was sharing those things. And eventually, like, I had like a Google Doc that had like all of the different things you could contribute to. And I was like, you know what, this would be more accessible if it was just a website. And I make websites all the time. So I also know like the importance of being able to say something on radio or on TV or on Instagram that's memorable. And so I just grabbed the Stand With Minnesota domain because I was like, this is the easy thing to remember. And yeah, and one day I just put up a directory. I changed my little Google Doc into a website. It's like a small action that led to kind of massive consequences. It became a huge project because I opened it up to like people submitting projects from anywhere and like kind of like vetting the basics of what people were doing. So as we've had like massive, political action in Minnesota in the past, we've seen a lot of resources go to like one or two or, a few organizations. And I was like, we need to prevent that from happening again, because what happens is like you get a pretty small nonprofit who gets tens of millions of dollars in donations, and it creates kind of like a massive barrier for capacity. People can't just like re-grant all that money instantly. They have to create processes. They have to build new boards. They have to do all kinds of different things. And so I was like, how do we spread out this money as far as we can? And so the directory became that. And then also like thinking about how people build trust in community when it comes to charitable giving in like mutual aid work. I wanted to make sure that like mutual aid was centered on the website. So a lot of the projects that, I didn't put up like a list of existing nonprofits you could donate to that would eventually use the money. It started out like centering mutual aid work, centering crowdfunding campaigns that were going directly to impacted families, communities, and then the nonprofits, and then the foundations, right? The website got millions of hits, especially around the time that Alex Preddy was murdered. It was shared by like Hillary Clinton and AOC on their social media and quite a few celebrities, and just raised tons and tons and tons of money. Like we looked at the publicly available numbers of things attached to the website, and it was about $20 million. And we can't claim credit for like all of that, right? People go to donate things throughout all different things, but we ended up kind of giving people a very accessible gateway, and then also built out the website to run a few of our own programs. So we have an adopt a rent program where people can apply and like offer to pay a family's partial or entire rent, and then they just send the money directly to the family. So we just like give them a Venmo or a Zelle or whatever for the family or a landlord, and have paid hundreds of families rent that way now. And then we also have a program where people can donate their airline miles. And that is all like volunteer run, mostly by an incredible volunteer named Peg. I love her. And, we're flying people home from detention or to a country where they feel more safe. If they want to return to their home country, we're able to connect with donors who are just booking them directly on flights. So yeah, it kind of evolved into several different projects. And then also just the project of keeping the website itself updated was huge. And it's now everything now is like managed by dozens of volunteers. And then we also did a project called Love Notes, where people could send a love note to folks in Minnesota, which was just really great for people's morale to be able to read that people in New Zealand were thinking about how they were organizing and they were feeling inspired, because people were out there in the streets doing the hard work. And I always try to, as I talk about this project, be like, I did this because I couldn't be in the streets, but I have so much respect for just how many of my peers dropped everything. And people, I don't know if people even realize the full extent for how long it happened, but really from December to April and continuing to like support neighbors, drive their neighbors to work, bring diapers, all these things. It's just been incredible to watch all of it. And I'm thankful for the website because it really gave me a front seat view to get to see just the breadth of how much stuff was happening.
How do you go from a Google Doc to $20 million and celebrity endorsements in just a couple of months? What did you know that you could use as a cornerstone when you started creating this? Because obviously you knew what you were doing.
It's pretty simple. I chose a domain that was easy to say. That was people wanted to help. I built a place for people to help. I built the door, basically, or a bridge, like for folks to come across. And it really helped that, like, I do have like deep roots in Minnesota, and that people kind of see me as like a trusted connection to movement work in Minnesota. So like it spread more easily because I am on Blue Sky and I have like 50,000 followers or whatever. And people were like, oh, Ashley put this thing together. So it spread easily because of that. But then it got shared more because it was this like comprehensive resource, right? We had like news articles of what was happening and places you could connect. And people were just like emailing us the most random things, like companies who wanted to donate things. I talk a lot about like these people who donated 1,000 pee funnels. A company that makes pee funnels so that like people can stand up and pee, and they just like randomly cold called us on the email account, and we were able to like make a connection to who could distribute that, and that happened like a million times of like, here's this donation, how do we connect it? There's usually not like a front door into these things as they happen, right? But we kind of built that front door.
Going forward, if you weren't working in kind of a triage mode, but you are actually putting down the foundation for a new way forward, what have you learned?
Man, For the first month, I basically did this with just 2 other volunteers. And that got me to a point where I was very broken. I was stressed. I was not sleeping. I was working 20 hours a day on the website and connecting people and reading emails. Because also, as much as we got to be a front door for people from around the world, we also ended up being a help desk for people in Minnesota who had no idea where to reach out to. And I felt so much obligation to respond to every email from someone who's I can't pay my rent. Where do I go? And so we had to in real time develop resources in multiple languages of here's where you can apply for rent help, here's who does rent help based on different immigration statuses, who you're eligible for and what. And then there's some families who I've gotten very connected to, who my dad is literally delivering birthday presents for their kids. My dad, bless him, has been my kind of surrogate on the ground and has had to receive and run a lot of errands based on the website. I think the biggest thing I would have learned, I would do differently, right, is building a team earlier on. But the hardest part was being the one in Texas and seeing everyone already doing so much in Minnesota. I couldn't ask people on the ground in Minnesota to help me, and I couldn't trust people not from Minnesota to know how to do what I was doing. So it took a little time until I could find folks who had any capacity in Minnesota to actually step in and help. And it took going actually physically to Minnesota. I was there for 9 days and was able to build a team on the ground to help support me with the project online. We know that when we show up, things happen. We know that we can take care of each other. And so all of these things come together, I think, that especially if there's one thing about Minnesotans in particular, it is that we freaking love being Minnesotans. And we might have problems with our governor or with the state or whatever, or the weather, but we really do feel something about being Minnesotans. We are not Wisconsinites. We are not Iowans. We are Minnesotans. I think that the fact that the threat came from outside, that it was the president and that he was attacking us and he's bringing people in from other places, really made people come together to protect Minnesota. It was about all of us, and it was about all of us versus this outside force. And I think that was a powerful thing. Yeah.
You sounded very Minnesotan when you said we love being freaking Minnesotans.
It's really funny, when you look at, there's actually political, communications work about this, that, it's a powerful talking point in Minnesota to appeal to, our better angels in a way that, people don't say. And in the political communications, if you're in, Missouri, people don't really, say, we're from Missouri, we know that justice is important. That doesn't happen in a lot of other places. But in Minnesota, that's one of the most powerful ways you move people on political issues. If you want to get someone to agree with raising taxes, we can say, we're in Minnesota, we know we want clean air. We're in Minnesota, we know we want, schools where every kid can thrive. And people just accept that. And that's just not a thing in a lot of places.
Ashley Fairbanks is an Anisiiwiikwe from Gawababaginikog in northern Minnesota. Raised on the south side of Minneapolis and now based in San Antonio, Texas. A storyteller and activist, she has spent more than 15 years working at the intersection of communications, organizing, design, and culture, helping turn big ideas into campaigns that move people to action. Ashley began her career designing museum exhibitions before moving into politics and advocacy. She has worked on municipal, gubernatorial, senatorial, and presidential campaigns, launched creative community projects, and led narrative campaigns on climate justice, democracy, and equity. She currently serves as the Communications and Creative Director at 100%, a climate and clean energy organization from Minnesota. She is also the founder of Stand With Minnesota, a rapid response campaign that has raised millions of dollars and connected thousands of families to direct support during a time of crisis. Ashley is also the author of 2 books, This Land and Boarding Schools and the Indigenous Story, both published by Penguin Random House. She lives with her family and a scruffy white dog named Waffles. For more information, visit ziibiing.com. That's ziibiing.com, or visit the show notes at softpowerfulstories.org. As ever, thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate the support. If you haven't already liked us or followed us or left a comment or a review, there is no time like the present to do so. For more information about Soft Powerful Stories, visit softpowerfulstories.org. There you'll find photos of our guests, learn more about their activities, and have a chance to leave us feedback. We would love to hear from you. My name is Christopher Wurst. I'm the producer and host of Soft Powerful Stories. Until next time.